Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and as the countdown to Godzilla King of the Monsters 2019 continues, there's a particular mystery which needs addressing.
Leading up to the release of Kong Skull Island, Legendary began its viral marketing by releasing the Monarch Timeline, which highlighted important events in the history of the MonsterVerse.
Some entries are about the events depicted and referenced in Godzilla 2014 and Kong Skull Island, while others are clearly setting up King of the Monsters. But there are two entries in particular which remain anomalous.
The 1952 entry reads as follows. The Great Smog of London. Baffling meteorologists and defying atmospheric physics, this atmospheric phenomenon saw London streets overwhelmed by huge clouds of air-polluting smoke. Monarch theorizes that the beating wings of a giant could have created an anticyclone that unleashed air pollutants across the city.
So that means I have to correct a bit of an error I made in an earlier video where I said that event took place in Victorian times. That's on me, I have my dates mixed up.
Moving on though, the 1959 entry says this. Siberian Mystery. At the height of the Cold War, aerial photography taken from a Russian spy plane reveals a huge containment facility established around an ice cap in Siberia. The Monarch symbol can be seen emblazoned across the canopy of the structure.
So far, these are the only two events which remain unexplained. Pretty much everything else can be connected to the four movies which we know comprise the MonsterVerse.
Obviously, the specific events shown or referenced in Godzilla 2014 and Kong Skull Island are easily identified, and we also get some build-up for King of the Monsters by way of revealing the respective locations of Rodin, Mothra, and King Ghidorah. Yet the Great Smog of London and the Siberian Mystery stand at odds with the rest, for they don't appear connected to anything at first glance. So what could these entries be referring to? What could they potentially be setting up?
Having given it some thought and reviewed what we know, I've come up with a few possibilities as to what they might be referring to. So I present to you the possibilities of what the Siberian Mystery and the Great Smog of London could actually be.
Possibility 1, nothing.
I admit this isn't the most exciting answer, but we must still acknowledge the possibility that these events aren't foreshadowing anything at all.
They might have been added purely to generate buzz or because someone in marketing thought they would be cool to throw in. Whatever the reason, what we see here could be little more than a couple of red herrings, Cloverfield's unidentified falling object times 2. If that's the case though, they would be the only entries on the timeline to hold that distinction. And that makes me feel like they must be more than mere filler.
Given how pretty much everything else on the timeline connects to something in the movies, including the mercenary entry if recent rumors are to be believed, it stands to reason these two entries must be connected somehow as well.
Possibility 2, familiar monsters.
There have been rumors for a while now that Warner Brothers and Legendary have the rights to more monsters than they're letting on. And there are many who say the Great Smog of London is hinting at one of these secret acquisitions.
Among the popular candidates from Toho are Destroya and Hedorah, the former being a large winged creature and the latter being a known producer of Smog. Others look at the London location and suspect British beasts such as Gorgo or the giant behemoth.
Of those candidates, each one has a caveat that makes it unlikely, and I'm not just referring to how all of them are unconfirmed.
The entry states that a winged monster is believed responsible, which is a very specific detail to include. Gorgo and the behemoth would thus be unlikely since neither monster traditionally has wings, unless they are being radically reinterpreted, which given the track record thus far seems unlikely, neither one could be responsible. Hedorah would seem like a perfect candidate given that this is the Great Smog of London and he is the Smog monster, yet once again he doesn't have wings. Plus, the smog is said to have been caused merely by the monster's beating wings, rather than having been generated directly by the monster. That leaves Destroya. If the Oxygen Destroyer image really is teasing Des, however, that leaves the question of what it was doing in 1952. Again though, jumping directly from Oxygen Destroyer to Destroya confirmed is a stretch in its own right.
The two prequel comics, Godzilla Awakening and Skull Island: The Birth of Kong, don't help matters because neither of them reference the event at all.
If either of them were to have shown it directly, it would have been Awakening, which covers a period between 1945 and 1954, and the likeliest candidate would have been the Shinomura. However, the Shinomura never leaves the Pacific region, so there's no way they could have affected the weather in London. The Birth of Kong was developed at roughly the same time as the timeline, so it could have referenced the event in passing if it wanted to, but it never does, not even in the supplemental material, so that's no help either.
What about the 5 familiar faces returning for King of the Monsters? Rodin, Mothra, and King Ghidorah. Could any of them be responsible?
Well, we can rule King Ghidorah out immediately. One does not simply become buried under multiple layers of Antarctic ice overnight. That sort of thing takes centuries at the very least, so there's no way he would have been responsible for an incident in 1952. Mothra also seems unlikely since the timeline states she's currently in a cocoon somewhere in South America. Even if that cocoon is a recent development, it would likely have meant she was a larva in 1952, and thus would have lacked the wings to generate the anticyclone. That leaves us with Rodin. Given his reputation for weaponizing wind in his attacks, he could be the most likely culprit, but this will depend on how long he's been inside that volcano referenced in the 1991 entry, and whether or not he can leave as he pleases.
Moving on, the Siberian Mystery is a bit easier to narrow down. If this really is referring to a pre-existing monster, many fans put their money on the Rhedosaurus, or as you may better know him, the beast from 20,000 Fathoms.
The elements would appear to line up. The location near the Arctic Circle in particular is very nearly identical to where the Rhedosaurus is first awoken in his debut film. The one element that doesn't quite line up is the date of 1959, since the beast from 20,000 Fathoms debuted in 1953. Seeing as how the MonsterVerse has thus far been able to reference the original dates for Godzilla and King Kong in one way or another, it seems odd that if this is the Rhedosaurus, it would instead see the date for the giant behemoth.
Okay, I think we're starting to spiral down the rabbit hole now. Let's cut this off here and move on to the last possible answer.
Possibility 3. Something new.
We know for a fact that Godzilla, King Kong, Rodin, Mothra, and King Ghidorah are not the only monsters in the MonsterVerse.
They are in fact vastly outnumbered by a slew of new creatures such as the Mutos, the various nightmares occupying Skull Island, and the new creatures alleged to be appearing in King of the Monsters. Jordan Vogt-Roberts has also stated in interviews that the creature which attacked the Lawton, you know, the ship Bill Randa was on, was something akin to a kraken.
No, I won't bring it up again.
When the MonsterVerse was first announced as a shared universe, it was stated that it would include a mix of both old and new kaiju. I myself have speculated in the past that Randa's story might have been hinting at a creature which might show up in a future installment, possibly as a foe to prematurely end the rematch between Godzilla and Kong. Whether there's a connection between that creature and these inexplicable entries, who can say? But there is still a possibility that the reason we can't figure out what's being hinted at is because it's something we can't possibly anticipate.
In the end, these two entries remain anomalous. When all you have to go on is a date, a block of text, and a stock photograph, there are only so many conclusions you can reach.
However, if they are not just there for decoration, and whether they represent something new or familiar, the chance remains that it might be hinting at something beyond either Godzilla or Kong, possibly new films to come after their crossover. Sure, it may seem like a stretch, but such obscure bits of foreshadowing have happened in shared cinematic universes before.
Back in 2010, one of the last scenes of Iron Man 2 showed a map of the world with a spot highlighted in Africa. Many fans suspected this might be Wakanda, and this was long before a Black Panther movie was ever officially announced. 5 years after that, Wakanda was directly referenced as existing in Avengers Age of Ultron, and 3 years after that, we finally went there in Black Panther. So this sort of long-term foreshadowing does happen.
Like I keep saying, the MonsterVerse isn't officially over until we get confirmation that it is, so my philosophy is something like this.
Until such time as the world ends, we will act as though it intends to spin on.
So perhaps these anomalies are a glimpse of the future beyond Godzilla vs. Kong. MonsterVerse Phase 2, if you will.
Right now, it's all just speculation. All possibilities are equal at this point. even if some are admittedly more interesting than others. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. You know, I really ought to review these things at some point. Well, better get to work.